everybody. Hey folks, it is Mrs. Johnson with the Agro Wisdom channel. We are still doing FFA lullabies. I've got my drink. I had a late dinner, so I don't have any snacks today. I've got my stuffed animal and my blankets and my fires going. All my cute little fairy lights. I do have a camera coming this week. Should be here. I keep promising you that I'm going to get a better camera, and it's coming. Yay! I'm also fighting with my mic this week, so I apologize for that. If my audio sounds different or worse, if you prefer this one, let me know. But this is like the original mic on my school laptop, so I doubt it sounds better. But we'll see. Let's see. We are reading Cattle Country Peter French by Giles French, who is not related, by the way. I just read chapter 5, where we talked about how Peter French got up to southeastern Oregon, and we talked about what Oregon looks like. And there are some references to some really common places in northern California. In that chapter. I have not previewed this next chapter, chapter 6, called The First Years in Oregon, on page 47. But I don't think there's pictures. There's not pictures, but it is very short. It's like 8 pages. Yeah. Anyway, we're gonna read it though. And hopefully, no crazy tangents this time. I'm trying to get better at that. I promise. Okay. Let's go. First Years in Oregon. Page 47. When Peter French looked down on the valley of Blitzen in the summer of 1872, it was green with high grass and dry enough in most places for his cattle to pasture safely. The swamp worried him less than it did his contemporaries, for he intended to watch his stock carefully. There was to be no wandering untended into treacherous areas. Dr. Glenn had trusted him and given him a chance. Peter French was determined to do his part as well as he could. There would be no turning of cattle loose on a wide range, however good, letting them rustle for themselves. Neither would they be lost in swamps. Peter French intended to be a cattleman in a more modern style than others in the West, who, from Montana to Texas, let cattle run the range unattended. This valley, surrounded by sloping hills, on which grass grew as high as a man's stirrups, which is like 4 or 5, no, not 5 feet, it's like 3 to 4.5 feet. As high as a man's stirrups, looked like cattle heaven to Peter French. And though it could be just that if range and cattle were properly he thought it could be just that if range and cattle were properly managed. Oh my goodness, I cannot say words today. Even though the valley looks that way, and certainly no cowman has stood on the rim of Jackass Mountain, above Old P Ranch, without breaking the commandment, thou shalt not covet. I don't know what that means. French intended to own that valley, all of it, bottom and hill, whether from ambition or avarice, from loyalty to Dr. Glenn or from simple ego. He wanted it, and he got it. Near the spot where the Blitzen reaches the bottom, French set up headquarters. Here, in an entirely strange land, he had no more than 6 men to look after his band of cattle and construct some necessary buildings. Though it was summer and the days were warm with sunshine, still it was time to get ready for winter, and the intensity of which he could not estimate. He learned that at Fort Harney, 70 miles to the north, there was a small sawmill owned by Albert H. Roby, who, in 1867, had brought the machinery from Boise to saw lumber for the interior of the fort. From this mill, French obtained lumber to build a house to shelter his men and give his Chinese cook, Charlie on Long, a feeling of greater security. Roby's team of 16 oxen brought the first lumber, but in a short time, French had broken horses to make up his own freight team. He cut poles and brush for corrals, weaving the willows through the posts for some, using shorter erect willows for others. Such corrals will last a lifetime with little repair. From Fort Bidwell, he obtained a mower and a rake to put up some hay for the stock, in preparation for the winter. French and his little crew had the valley to themselves, lost in a wealth of space and busy building a cow ranch. By 1873, he was sending 8 and 10 horse freight teams to Surprise Valley in California and as far north as La Grande to obtain tools, harnesses, nails, glass, machinery, and saddles. The teams also brought back tons of wire for fencing. French made a reputation in Harney County for the quality of his fences and the miles of it he built. The wire was smooth, without the barbs that were first added to fence wire in 1874, though not successfully until 1877. The wagons also brought salt and sugar, soda for sourdough, coffee, beans, and flour. Peter French set out an orchard near his house, planting it with apples, plums, crab apples, gooseberries, and even some of the softer fruits. Red June apples may still be picked from the trees he planted. His bottom land produced garden vegetables of the more durable varieties, even though the elevation was more than 4,000 feet. Garden could not be grown here as in lower altitudes, but root crops and hardier vegetables could be had by dropping the seed and keeping the cows out of the patch. There were trout in the river right at the door, deer hid in the clumps of willows near the house, antelope sped through the sage, and bighorn sheep could still be found. Grouse and ducks lived in this valley that is now a refuge for all kinds of birds. Sometimes Peter kept hogs for bacon and ham, though he usually purchased these. The staple foods, and there were no other kind, all came by wagon, though there were no luxuries, neither was there hunger. The men at the P Ranch had good food. French saw that. The big beef wheel near the barn was used as often as needed to provide the meat. The beef wheel raised a beef carcass into the air for dressing and was high enough to take it beyond the reach of dogs or coyotes. When you hang meat, as a side note, you have to hang it enough for the body heat to leave. Otherwise, it's not technically meat, and it's still, dead. That sounds weird when I say that out. But that's, essentially true. Anyway, back to reading. Ranch hands had few diversions. Maybe a little music by banjo, mouth organ, or Jew's harp, when time and mood permitted. There was little to read, though French was a subscriber to the Colusa Sun. There was always a jug of liquor for medicinal purposes, and women were a sometimes thing. These first years in Oregon set the pattern for the future success of P Ranch. During that time, French and his Mexicans came to know the country, the wet spots in the meadow where cattle could be lost, the richest grass slopes along the west side of the Steens, the time to calf, the time to bring cattle down from the hills before the winter snows. This is the sort of knowledge, part of it intuitive, the stockman must have if he is to prosper. The crew that rode up from California was large enough for a start, where range was open and plentiful, and where there was no one except wandering Indians to steal stock or supplies. The Mexicans stayed year after year, liking the location and their boss more and more. A list of men working at the P Ranch shows the Mexican names of Vicente Ortega, Juan Ortega, who homesteaded the P Ranch quarter section and sold it to French in 1882, Juan Charis, Jesus Charis, Prime Thibault Ortega, Joaquim Chino Bordugo, often the range boss, and Francisco Chico Charge, I'm so sorry. I do know Spanish, but I can't read well anymore in Spanish, okay? Please don't be judging me. Please. Anyway. Some of them sent for their relatives. As time went on and the crew expanded, American names appeared. In those days, it was not at all unusual for a young man to saddle his horse some bright morning, tie a few blankets behind the cantle, pocket some food, and go out to make his own way. Even if he was still in his teens, no sheriff was put on his trail, and no tears were shed at his assumption of manhood. A young man, or an old one, could find food and shelter at any big cow ranch, perhaps a job. He had to work wherever he was, and life was not easy anywhere. Men on the P Ranch worked hard because there was nothing else to do. Besides, it was what they came for. It went on winter and summer because Peter French was a good boss, who somewhere had learned that the way to keep a crew satisfied was to keep them busy. They quarreled less and they stayed longer when occupied. In a way, the P Ranch was a monarchy. Everyone knew who was to give orders. French told the men when to start, what to do, and how, if necessary. Working men expected this and respected a man who could keep the details of a large ranch in mind and ramrod its operations. The P Ranch boss took the lead, speaking in quiet tones but with authority. And when he said, "Thibault, take these two men and ride out the little Blitzen," that was what was done. Stockmen kept order in the Old West. Riders from a well-disciplined outfit seldom got into trouble. The nearest law from the Blitzen was 150 miles away in Canyon City. This put discipline in the hands of the ranch boss, who held the economic and social power to guide the community, aided by his own personal prestige and respect. Wages for the experienced cowhands was $30 to $35 a month, slightly less for beginners. Foremen earned up to 60 or 65 and found, meaning the employee could have spread his blankets on a shelf in the bunkhouse and have a place at the table at the headquarters. On the range, working cattle, the rider laid his blankets on some form-fitting spot of the ground and ate from a plate on his lap. As the French spread grew, it became necessary to keep certain supplies in stock at the ranch for the benefit of the men. When a rider's boots gave out, or he tore his pants, he needed replacements. Chewing and smoking tobacco were essential. According to the ranch records, old Jank, in quotes, Langley, had to have his chewing tobacco even if it did cost 25 cents a plug. Chewing tobacco was Peter French's only indulgence in the sins of unnecessary consumption. By 1877, the P Ranch store was doing business with settlers as well as employees. John Devine contracted a debt of $20 on one trip to the Blitzen Valley. My computer's dying. I can finish this chapter. John Devine contracted a debt of $20 on one trip to the Blitzen Valley. Ed Kygar bought a saddle for $37. Store records show sales of items not essential to the cow business, such as the sale of a suit of clothes to Frank Chapman for $24 and of a watch and ring to John South for $33.75. Probably these last items were bought elsewhere and charged on the company books, for a man known to be working for a big cow outfit had credit wherever he might be. Evidence of the growth of P Ranch shows in the size of the figures in French's long account journals. French himself entered some items, while others were written by employees detailed to look after the store and accounts. Perhaps because of illness or broken bones or some other ailment or condition that barred them from the jobs of cattle herding, fence repairing, ditch digging, or horse breaking. Sometimes a record of thousands of dollars received from the sale of cattle will be followed the next line by an entry concerning the sale of tobacco to a writer. Withdrawals of money for French's use and payments to Glenn appear on the same page with no greater emphasis than the man's wages. It must be assumed that these notations were daily record, the background for all business transacted. That is the basis on which all bookkeeping is done, and it is what French did, and all he did. To pay off a man, he merely referred to the last settlement, figured the time, and deducted his withdrawals and purchases. To know how much to send to Dr. Glenn required only the addition of receipts and the deduction of ranch expenses. A great deal of money was paid to Glenn, and a good many of dollars were received from him. To reach a balance in this late day would be a job for an expert accountant, aided by a talented mind reader. French gave his personal note to many men, probably for the purchase of land. Some accounts are too large for cattle deals only. The doctor knew that French was going to buy all the land he could, and that he, Glenn, was going to furnish the money for it, if P Ranch earnings were insufficient. On his part, French knew that his deals would be backed by Glenn, who never came to Oregon to check on the progress of the ranch. If French gave his note for the land, he was sure to be repaid in time, and he could always use the receipts from the sale of cattle to buy more land. Since there was no bank near this growing community of southern Grant County, French kept a supply of cash at the ranch, although not enough for the hundreds of transactions he handled. Many deals were made by the circulations of notes from men whose signature on a piece of paper was good enough to be negotiable. A $20 note was as good as a $20 gold piece, if there was confidence in the financial and moral integrity of the signer. Notes were endorsed by simple signatures. Since they were not signed without recourse, each signer was liable for payment. Such papers circulated freely, checks as well as notes serving as currency or gold. French gave S.B. Kiger his note for $1,710 with interest at 1% per month, a customary rate for a short-term paper, although money could sometimes be borrowed for 10% a year. He paid P. Bone $500 in cash and gave his note for $4,400 on the ranch. Checks and commercial paper are used for cash even in these days, but in the 70s, in Grant County, it was necessary to use evidence of indebtedness as a circulating medium. In 1877, the owner of the P Ranch was getting acquainted with Canyon City, the county seat of Grant County. In November of that year, he wrote, "Expenses Canyon City, $60. Buy lawyer fee $11 by MDSE merchandise. 2237 bought sheriff order $725. Give gold coin for same $548.25. French apparently bought some land from the sheriff at a reduced price. On the same trip, he left $1,000 for Osborne, bought a pair of boots for $14. Whatever was needed in the way of services was done on the ranch. Everyone did his own work. Winter was the time for a rider to get his equipment and repair for the longer days of summer. The men spent the winter evenings putting new stirrup leathers on saddles, braiding ropes out of rawhide, repairing harnesses, sewing patches on clothes. For every man was his own seamstress. Clothes were really not much of a problem. They were simple and utilitarian. Peter French's men dressed like other western cowmen. Their pants were of loose-fitting denim or wool. Their shirts were some durable material, neutral color, especially after a few washings in cold water and lye soap. Oh, my legs are sore. Shirts were not silk, nor any imitation thereof. If a man liked a touch of color, he might wear a bright-colored neckerchief, perhaps a silk one. We call those wild rags now. Just so you know, if you don't know. A neckerchief was a useful article of wear. Could keep the dust from falling down the neck or be pulled up to shield the mouth and nose when driven cattle kicked up a thick dust. Boots were heavy cowhide, often rough and ill-fitting. They made heavy wool and cotton socks desirable. Vests were common because they are the most useful garment a man in the open can wear. When unbuttoned, they hang loosely without binding. When buttoned, they are snug and warm. Besides, they have pockets in which to carry matches, the old surfer kind that came in bunches, along with tobacco, a few nails, and maybe a bit of jerky. The vest was a portable roll-top desk. Hats were generally of wool and large enough from which to water a horse. A wide-brimmed hat could be tied down along the ears with a handkerchief to keep them from freezing in a blizzard. Underwear was long and usually woolen, the most comfortable kind for men who live outdoors. Records of the sale of woolen winter overcoats are common in the French journals. Sheepskin and insulated coats were unknown in the 70s and 80s. Men wore chaps the year around, heavier ones in winter for warmth and lighter ones in the summer for protection from brush. Some said they were cool in the summer because the wind blew up them. A man going out to look after cattle probably took along a hammer, or better yet, a pair of heavy pliers, so that he could get through fences and also repair broken ones. A few staples came in handy. When riding to look after cattle, a man often packed a rifle because of coyotes, wolves, bobcats, and other predators that killed calves and destroyed game. The television concept of a cowman strapping on a 6-gun at the start of a day's work is modern and fictitious. A carbine in a saddle sheath was a better weapon for coyotes and did much less banging around. A revolver was a poor tool for anything but close work, although it did make for a fearful and impressive noise. Even in the usually dry southeastern Oregon, a slicker tied behind the saddle was sometimes found useful before night. And a man going out on the range for a day first went by the cookhouse to get a couple of biscuits to put in his chap pockets. It might grow dark before he could eat again. And that is the end of chapter 6. First years in Oregon. We learned about what cow hands in that era do, what they look like, a little bit more expansion. Without further ado, I'm going to let you go because my computer is dying and I'm kind of... It's like 10:15. I'm not tired. I might plug my computer in and do another video. You never know. But if you have comments, questions, concerns, drop them in the comments below. I hope you learned something. I hope we're learning, and I hope some of my farmers are asleep by now. Please, please. Okay. Anyway, get some sleep. Take care of yourself. Eat some food. Drink some water if you haven't. Okay. Have a great day.